Poems generally contain imagery, and images, to a large extent, are simply pictures. So, a poem, in that sense, is a picture or a series of pictures. The question then is, okay, if a poem is a picture, what do you see? I'm going to read the opening lines of Matthew Arnold's poem Dover Beach. Try to visualize it, to imagine it, to make it come to life as a series of pictures in your head. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full, the moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window, sweet is the night air. Think about it for a while. Let the words work their magic on you. I'm going to show you the pictures that come to my mind as I read this, but before I do that, you might like to pause the video and think a bit more about what you see. Yes, that's it. Pause. And a poem is not just a picture, of course, it's also a voice. Someone is saying all this, saying, come to the window. So that person must be talking to someone. Who can it be? Is it one person or a number of people? For now, it's a mystery. I'll come back to it later on. What I'd like to look at right now is the poetic technique. Let's take it line by line. The sea is calm tonight. A very simple picture. It shows us the sea. It shows us the fact that it's night time. And it includes that word calm, which sets the tone for this opening section of the poem. The tide is full. The moon lies fair. We've got a very balanced line here. The tide is full. Dee-dum, dee-dum. The moon lies fair. Dee-dum, dee-dum. And in addition to that, we've got the alliteration, the repeated F sound of full and fair. So the caesura, the break in the middle of the line, is perfectly balanced on either side. And that same simple iambic dee-dum pattern is repeated in the first part of the following line. So we get the tide is full, the moon lies fair upon the straits. And then on the French coast, the light gleams and is gone. Is it perhaps a lighthouse? And again, we've got the alliteration, gleams and is gone, both on the strong syllable, dum, diddy, dum, creating a sense of a pattern, a repetition. And then that alliteration is picked up in the next line with the glimmering cliffs of England as against the light that gleams on the French coast. And then the poet uses the word tranquil, reinforcing the sense of calm that was created at the beginning of the poem. Then another perfectly balanced line, come to the window, sweet is the night air, with the poet making it clear that he doesn't want air to have a strong stress by using that little hyphen there. He wants night air to have the same stress pattern as window to keep the balance between the two halves of the line. There's quite a lot going on in these opening lines, despite their apparent simplicity. In fact, we could even say that the simplicity is actually part of a more complex purpose. The way that the poet breaks the lines up into short phrases and sentences, creating a sense of balance and harmony, the way that he builds up a picture of a peaceful nighttime scene, and all of this together with those key words, calm and tranquil, all of this creates a sense of ease in the reader, a feeling of comfort and security. But in addition to being a kind of picture, or a series of pictures, and in addition to being a voice spoken by someone to someone, a poem is a balance of opposites. Arnold creates this sense of comfort and calm and peacefulness in these opening lines, only to heighten the contrast with what follows. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land, listen. You hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand, begin and cease, and then again begin with tremulous cadence slow, but bring the eternal note of sadness in. And again, I would suggest that you pause the video here and this time think about the language and the techniques that the poet is using. See what you can find for yourself. Okay, well, there's quite a lot of alliteration in the first part here. We've got the long line, the spray and the sea, meets and moon, and then back to the L sound with land and listen. The word only introduces a certain sense of doubt in our minds, but the continuing use of alliteration makes it seem as if the feeling, the mood of the earlier part of the poem is continuing here, but it ends when we get to that word listen, after which comes the grating roar of pebbles, which breaks decisively with the harmony and the silence and peace of the earlier part of the poem. While the light that gleams and is gone in the earlier part of the poem creates a sense of balance and harmony, the endless repetition of the waves that begin and cease and then again begin brings not calm and peacefulness, but a sense of anxiety. The grating roar becomes a tremulous cadence, leading inexorably to the key word of this part of the poem, the word sadness, the eternal note of sadness. Taking this opening section of the poem as a whole, the main rhythmic feature is the iamb, the weak, strong combination, didum. The sea is calm tonight. This pattern repeats itself all through the poem, but in these opening lines it's very regular, and then it breaks up a bit. On the French coast the light, diddy-dum-dum-dee-dum. So he changes the rhythm, and he comes back to it with, for example, the cliffs of England stand, dee-dum-dee-dum-dee-dum. But as the poem moves on, the rhythmic structure is very flexible. In the later part of the poem, though, he comes back again to the basic iamb. You hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand, begin and cease and then again begin. The basic dee-dum, dee-dum, dee-dum. But this time the content is not relaxing and reassuring and comforting, but restless, stressful and anxious. And the rhyme scheme, again, is fairly simple, but at the same time fairly flexible. Tonight rhymes with light in a very simple kind of way. Fair, jumping several lines there to rhyme with air. Stand rhyming with land and with strand further on in the poem. Bay and spray. And then This anomaly, this unusual rhyme, roar, which we can either look at as a completely random feature that doesn't rhyme with anything, or perhaps more appropriately, see it as a half rhyme, a sort of off-key rhyme with fair and air, the roar. And then fling and bring and begin and in, going back to that sort of fairly simple pattern. Very often it's the unusual element, the element that breaks with the basic pattern, that tells us a lot about what's going on in a poem. And that word roar, the fact that it's on its own there as a kind of half rhyme with fair and air, focuses attention on that particular part of the poem, which of course is where the tone changes. This discordant note breaks the harmony and changes the atmosphere of the poem. Let's move on now to the second stanza. Sophocles, long ago, heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound a thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. And again, before I go on to talk about this, can I ask you to pause the video and think about a single question here? The question is, why does Arnold introduce Sophocles here? What has Sophocles got to do with it? The Greek tragedian Sophocles lived in Athens in the 5th century BC. In his play Antigone, he talks about the stonovremusi, the sighing or lamenting roar of the surging waters of the sea. But in a sense, none of that really matters. The reason Arnold has brought Sophocles into the picture is because he lived in a distant time and place, and he also felt that sadness at the sound of the waves. In other words, Arnold universalizes his experience. He says it's not just about me. It's part of the human experience. It's bigger than me. And that, almost invariably, gets us thinking about ourselves. We will live, we will die, and those waves will continue to break upon the shore, as they have done for millions of years before us, and as they will continue to do millions of years after we are dead. Do we too feel that sadness that Arnold talks about? As for technique, there's not all that much to say in this section. The rhyme scheme is fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Ago rhyming with flow, brought rhyming with thought, and we rhyming with C in an ABA-CBC pattern, which is fairly regular, and regularity in general tends to mean something like business as usual. There's not that much to comment on. The rhythm too is on the whole fairly regular. It's the basic iamb, the weak strong de-dum rhythm, and it continues throughout the entire stanza. The only thing that's really worth noting is that there are 3 inverted feet. The foot is the repeated section, so de-dum would be the foot, an iambic foot, and in 3 cases it is dumdy. Sophocles heard it, and in that last line there, hearing. So these are examples of an inverted foot, which emphasize the basic point that Arnold is making. Sophocles heard it, and we too are hearing it. There are 1 or 2 other little irregularities, but those are the important ones. So Arnold compares himself to Sophocles and also prepares the reader for the next section of the poem. We find also in the sound a thought. So we're waiting now. What is it exactly that he thinks? What does the sound of the waves inspire in him? So let's move on to the third stanza of the poem. As we go through this, ask yourself what Arnold means by the sea of faith. The sea of faith was once, too, at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. We can't see faith, but through the metaphor of the sea, the poet enables us to visualize the idea of humanity being sustained by faith, just as the sea seems to wrap itself around the shore in a protective embrace. And he can represent the loss of faith through the image of the retreating waters as the tide goes out. The foam of the sea at high tide, like the folds of a bright girdle furled around the land, is like the protective mantle of faith, and the naked shingles of the world represent the harsh reality of facing life without hope, without God, without trust that somehow we are being taken care of in a benevolent universe. Looking at the rhyme scheme, we've got faith and breath, shore and roar, furled and whirled, and here and drear. So that's a half rhyme on faith and breath, and a rather unusual rhyming pattern of A, B, C, D matched with B, A, D, C, as if the second half of the stanza was somehow discordant or confused with that half rhyme there and the mix-up, the confused pattern of the rhyme scheme. And it's worth noting the alliteration at the beginning of this stanza, which picks up on the alliterated F sound in the first stanza. The tide is full, the moon lies fair. This echoing of the first stanza is even more apparent when we take a look at the poet's lexis, the choice of words. We have see, full, lay, only, hear, roar, all words which were used in the first stanza. And then we have a number of words which are not the same, but which are in the same semantic field. They cover a similar area of meaning. The bright girdle recalls the light that gleams on the French coast and the glimmering cliffs of England. Melancholy echoes sadness. Withdrawing and retreating both echo draw back, the waves which draw back, and the shingles are another word basically for the pebbles. Perhaps the most significant comparison between the two stanzas is the way that they are both divided into their optimistic or positive opening lines, followed by, in this case, but, and in the first stanza, only, and then the atmosphere becomes negative. Okay, so on now to the last section of the poem. I'm going to read it with some visual guidance, but there's one thing I'm going to leave out, because I'd like you to think about that. What is it that I'm leaving out of this picture at the end here? Ah, love, let us be true to one another. For the world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here, as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. So, were you able to visualize the bit that I left out? It's right at the beginning. Ah, love, let us be true to one another. Remember, in the first stanza he said, come to the window, sweet is the night air, and we said he was calling someone, asking someone to come to the window. And we didn't know who it was at that stage. Now we can see he's talking to the person he loves. Dover Beach was first published in 1867, but we know from Arnold's notes that it was written much earlier than that, probably in 1851, around about the time when Arnold got married. He is perhaps the most pessimistic of the poets of the mid-Victorian period, and that certainly shows in this poem, but there is a glimmer of hope here. The world may be a dreadful place, and we may no longer have a sufficiently strong religious faith to sustain us, but there is still, he says, the possibility that the love and trust that may exist between people may somehow help us to overcome the intrinsic sadness of life. In terms of technique, the rhyme scheme for the stanza is fairly straightforward. We've got true rhyming with new, seems with dreams, light with flight and night, and pain with plain, giving us a basic ABBA, CDD-C structure with a final C at the end. We've got 3 strong syllables at the beginning of the stanza, our love, let us be true, followed by the middle section, the main section of the stanza, which is essentially in iambic pentameter, and then a short line at the end. We've got the alliterated L sound, love, let, like, land, and love, light, and we've got the inexorable repetition of neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. So let's take a look at how these various effects work together to create the tone or atmosphere of this final stanza of the poem. We've got the strong stress there at the beginning on those 3 opening syllables, ah, love, let us be true, aided by the alliteration of LL, love, let. It focuses attention on his final positive point. And the regular rhythm of the following 3 lines, with again that alliteration on L, like, land, leads us very smoothly and naturally into the next section where he utterly destroys that positive feeling with the very, very strongly negative nor love, nor light. And again, the alliteration carries a strong sense of purpose here because he is actually picking up on the same sound that he used so positively earlier on, love, let us be true, like a land of dreams. And now that same sound is being used to convey a hugely negative message, which continues until the end of the poem. And then there's that last line with its missing strong stress on the 4th syllable, emphasizing the confusion and the chaos of the world that he's describing. Looking overall at the positive and negative elements of the poem, well, he starts off by saying that the world is a beautiful place. But that quickly turns negative as he comes to contemplate the idea that, well, the world doesn't care about us. So then he moves on to faith as another possible positive. But again, the mood becomes negative as he considers the fact that we've lost our faith. And then in a final attempt to find something positive that may outweigh these factors, he turns to his love. In fact, it's his wife. And he wonders if perhaps that is enough to counterbalance the negative elements that are all around him, but he nevertheless ends with that same negativity. The world is a terrible place. He would like it, I think, if the love that he had for his wife, if the love that people could have for each other were enough to sustain them and carry them through, but he's not holding his breath.